all uncentered. Okay, perfect. All right, great. We have me, and we have Mohamadi, and we have Joseph Montero with us today. We're continuing with our Heroes series. Of course, Heroes kind of, is in quotes, but just like the heroic act of getting on live and talking about things with me and supporting Law of Implication and talking about things, just kind of being genuine and, and so forth. And then we'll talk about whatever, and we'll get to know Joseph and Mohamadi a bit, and then we can also, depending on how it flows, we can kind of check in with the concept of mastery. I have just a couple of simple slides, but I'll show one thing quickly. Where I put like the mastery mentality versus like the expert or suck mentality. I couldn't think of a better word than suck. I know it's kind of colloquial, but like people be like, oh, I suck at that, or they'll kind of get into an expert mentality with things where, and I also want us to kind of think about mastery first because it's a cool way to approach life, but also because people want to master Law of Implication itself. And so we can all like take a look at some thoughts on that. Okay, we'll start with Mohamadi, and why don't you? I know that your first big exposure was with alchemy that I did in, I believe, 2016, and as you have your story with that, so why don't we turn it over to you for a bit, and you can let us know about how you got started with things and so forth, and your thoughts.
Definitely, if you're in this webinar, you are part of, David's mastermind, one of the communities that we all spring from. And I was involved in OMG 2016 project assimilation. At that time I was, I just got to the country about a year and a half ago, and from West Africa, from a country called Burkina Faso. And as you come from a country like Burkina Faso, I had like a whole situation that did not allow me to do some of the things that I have planned to come and do here. So I ended up, getting, as far as going to school and things like that, ended up getting a job at a shoe store in the basement, hot basement, stocking shoes, and that's when I found out about David, OMG and Mike Long and everybody involved in the program. And as a kid from West Africa, just the concept of like, oh, marketing, like it's not something that is known in my community as far as people from my country, different parts of Africa mostly, that are in the United States. And I just know that I need to do something better. It's not like shoes. It's not like every day I wake up, I just feel like I have to find something much better to do. And through consistently, like thinking about it, you attract a big piece of law implication. So I end up stumbling on Mike and Ty, and through Ty, and eventually got involved with OMG in 2016. And the main piece is like, okay, it's a mindset. Okay, I didn't listen to anybody around me because they couldn't relate to me as much. I make the step, just say different things, and I made the step just knowing that the community, where I was at that time, I didn't want to be at that place for an extra day. So I was ready to take a different decision that none of the people in that circle wouldn't have made. So I made the decision to get involved with OMG and started the training. Everything was, good, getting better, just listening to everything as far as technicality on getting the business rolling, a very massive piece. But there was another option, another section of it, which was, David Alchemy. And by the way, in 2016, if you join, that intensive intro that David had back then, just calming, like anybody that joined the members area would know that, hey, welcome. and just know that it's fine if you feel confused, right? You just have to find your get here first, and then you start breaking things down. So the parallel guidance that was provided as far as problem solving, thinking for yourself, how to your relationship between your client, a relationship within yourself, that David was teaching alongside the OMG training through alchemy was really helpful in the sense that I didn't have any other source to rely on because everybody around me didn't speak the language I was speaking. It was like, oh, you want to do.
Some of what you said, it kind of relates to what I had on the slide just a few minutes ago, where I had like the mastery mentality versus like the expert or I suck at this mentality. It's like you're either an expert where you can speak the language, you can fit in with the people that are other experts, and and it's like a culture almost of being an expert in a particular topic. And then otherwise it might be just, oh, I suck at this. But mastery it's just a different mindset. That's it's a process, it's a method, and it's inevitable, right? You can master anything that you're willing to go through the process of, not just by telling yourself that you're going to master it, but by doing that. But yeah, that kind of relates to that intro video.
Yep. So it's like, they're telling me, oh, you want to do marketing. Who do you know that does marketing? Like as I would show Mike Long, like he's like, oh, this guy went to high school. This guy got a diploma. This guy got is get a certification that he went to school, and he's not anything specific, but they were like, oh, Mike Long, look at him, he looks like somebody that can do that. And look at you, you're from Africa, you don't even speak English. How are you gonna break into, like, how are you gonna do this? Because they're like, and their mentality is different. So having David at that time with alchemy, just consistently like breaking things down in a way that is very like easy to assimilate. Even back then, my English was not at the level it is today. So I would like, I had like a whole, like the whole alchemy, every single episode in a USB key, and I still have it till today. Stick in my computer, by the way. I still have it till today. And it's like, okay, it's very deep, and it requires a lot of attention and a lot of focus to be able to, really get the message that David is providing. So I would listen to it consistently. I'd be in the gym, I would listen to it. I would, just take my walks, listen to it a lot. And one of the most important pieces that I always like remember through everything is when you mention about thinking for yourself, right? Thinking for yourself, and because everybody have like a conceptual belief of like, oh, this is our relationship with math, and it's like the same analogy you was using in the first episode of Law of Implication, right? People have a certain relationship with math, and if you go buy something, they give you a change, it's expected to be a certain number, and if the number is not different, you can go, hey, the change is not correct, and the other side would look into it and correct everything, and everybody's just going in the same path, right? And as far as math is concerned, but that approach is only limited to math, right? And there's a lot of other things that people want to implicate in the same train of thought, in the same like lineup, right? And it's not something that can be put in the same lineup. Hey, this is how we think here. If you're within that circle, if you're within the African community, you should go get a job and do dishwash at the restaurant. Or if you're not doing that, or you don't want to go do dishwash, so there's something wrong with you, type of mentality, right? So the thinking of yourself process kind of like got me, okay, it's not nothing wrong with me by trying to do better, nothing wrong with me by saying that I'm okay with, living in a certain way, sacrificing for a small, for a small period of time, so I can, eventually get to the lifestyle that I want, that I see people like Mike saying that, hey, I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I grew up drinking powdered milk, right?
Let me jump in here again for a moment, because you helped give me a good example. One of the core concepts of law of implication is understanding the difference between thinking comparatively and thinking associatively. Thinking associatively is default thinking. It isn't bad or wrong, but it has to be supplemented
Yeah.
by thinking comparatively, right? So a little bit like you brought up as talk about math, it's fine to instantly come up with or remember a math answer like 9 times 9, but you want to be able to understand how to get to that and fix a problem if you're remembering something, but but it turns out to be wrong, or if someone says it could be wrong. So your example with, if you're West African and in the community that you were with, or not even with, but discarded by default, the associatively, like culture, right? It's associative. The idea meaning that if you're being West African was associated with, for example, doing dishes in the kitchen. Of course, I'm not saying that, but you're just saying that would be like the culture that you were exposed to there. So, so that's associative, right? It's like these two things go together.
Right.
And then what you did in thinking for yourself is comparative thinking, where you said, well, what do I want, right? It just makes sense to think, what do I want? What do I want to be? And that's gives you a point of comparison. Then you say, can I get there using by washing dishes, right? And for some people, they might be able to get to where they want, and it might be the right answer to wash dishes, right? And I have nothing whatsoever against washing dishes. But if there's things that you want to achieve, just like I don't worship going to college, but if someone wants to be a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, they simply have to legally do that, so then you have to go to college. So the thinking for yourself involved comparative thinking ultimately. And it's interesting to see, like, when we're sitting here on this webinar, it's easy to say, well, that's obvious that for what you wanted, you couldn't get there washing dishes. But it's funny, because the overwhelming number of people in your position, it feels so powerful, that associative default thing, where, well, this is just how I fit in, this is where I belong. I'm getting a kind of it's almost obnoxious to my fellow community if I try to do something different. It's like I'm saying I'm better, or I'm correcting them, or I think I'm superior, right, or that sort of thing, and that could feel bad. So anyway, just a good, like, real life example of comparative versus associative thinking. Again, not that associative thinking is bad, but what is bad is being constrained by it or treating it like it's true.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
I'm good. I was just thanking you for that, for kind of giving me the fodder for that example.
Yeah, it's incredible the way you put it out as far as associative and comparative. At that time, I felt like, that might have felt that the fact that I'm deciding to think comparatively instead of thinking associatively, I'm kind of taking myself, like, taking myself out of an equation, right? And that's like what I thought I was doing. I was taking myself out of the equation. And what they might have been thinking is like, I'm trying to take them out of an equation. No, like, you're good with everybody around you, think the same way, and that's how you perceive things. It's good. But like with me personally, I don't see that. It's not saying there's something wrong with you or not, but I don't see that being in line with what I want, right? Because some people might not want what I want, right? And I'll be fine just being together all day, talking about, soccer, talking about, politics back home, right? And me not being available for that might have been the problem, right? So they would try in their own sense to, like, hey, we gotta open his eyes, right? And that might have been their like the perception of their conversations with me. And like me personally, I saw it's like I would see, okay, somebody that came to America 20 years ago, and they have an apartment that they rent an apartment and they share half with other people, and the other people would pay most of the rent. And they would be like, oh, I'm just living rent free, almost rent free. And then I have an Uber that I'm driving around, right? An Uber that that I'm driving around and get to work 5 hours a day and come back home midday, relax in the house, and then decide to go out later or just stay, right? And that's like ultimate luxury to them, right? Ultimate luxury. It's like they're comfortable, right? And me personally, I would sit down and like, okay, now you are by yourself, like you have a couple of kids, like you are by yourself, and you feel like, okay, I'm comfortable. I can go out every day and make $300, right? And just come back. It's good for me. And like what I would do is like future paced, right? Was considered that same exact person that decide to get married in like 2 years from now, right? 2 years from now, and they start having kids, right? One kid or two kids. And you fast forward 10 years, instead of 30, they'll be like somewhere around 40, 45 years old, and they're sitting with two kids. And the rent that you was like living almost rent free is not going to be available anymore because you're going to kick a lot of people out because you want more space for your family, obviously, right? So that door is going to be shut if you're living almost rent free. And on the other end, you're like, okay, you can work until 5 and come home midday. That's not going to be available either because $300 cannot take care of a wife and a kid and a couple of kids, right? Not even talking about college stuff that's going to come. But what happened most of the time, they don't realize what's waiting for them, and they don't even think about what's potentially waiting for them, right? So when you are able to like future pace and see things in like how your trajectory would lead you, it's like in anything, right? You know, if you get in map maker and you put in the work that is required today, you're not far away from having 10 clients a month, right? It's like
Mhm.
you can like half predict, right? Knowing that there's a few equation that goes into play, like extra, like following the training and working and following everything that you are required to do to get there, right? So if this same person could, you know, see what the future will look like in 10, 15 years, they would realize that, oh, I cannot commit to that. Like Mike like to say, when you see, you can, once you see, you cannot unsee it, right? And when I saw that, okay, 20 years, like fast forward, this guy's in this position, and another 20 years, he's going to be in a position where he have two kids and a wife, and what's his potential, his ability to make money is restrained in that 24 hours and driving an Uber around, right?
Mhm.
And that's not a feature that I could see for myself. So fast forward, I would go to, okay, I'm in the sneaker store and I look around, see somebody that has spent 18 years in the sneaker store, right? And they're getting paid maybe $19 an hour, right? And I've been there for 18 plus years. And I was at that time I was getting paid $8, $9 an hour, right? And I was like, okay, so if I need to spend 18 years of my life here and get an extra $10 an hour, it doesn't sound like something I want to do, right? So from there on, I just knew that I has to be in a different place, right? So it's like associative thinking. All the employees are together. They, laugh, have fun, enjoy themselves when there is no client. It's beautiful. Or associative thought, and they think alike. And when are you start talking about other things, and you start looking in different way in different places, you automatically become someone that is trying to put them, classify them in a different category automatically, right? Even if you don't have that conversation. Like someone told me, oh, like you always talk about money and success. Money and success is not everything, you know. And mind you, like law of implication is not only about money getting, it's how to have your life all structured. Your relationship with money, it's, you know, you build a great relationship with money, you yourself and money. Money is not never gonna, should never be a problem. And then you build a relationship with people, your friends, family, and you know your like love relationship, right? And
Mm-hmm.
besides that, you build a relationship with people that you do business with, your clients, right? And ultimately look to do something that's going to change the world, right?
Yeah.
And that's like law of implication in one phrase, right? So when you have that like conception, right? And people's like, oh, you only talk about money. It's like, no, money is never supposed to be a problem, right? But what's sad is money is a problem in a lot of cases where people destroy their personal relationships, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, you were talking about it because it was the bottleneck at the time. You know, like it's you didn't want you focus on a bottleneck to break the bottleneck. It's not
100%.
that life is permanently about that bottleneck, but it's about that bottleneck until you break it. You know, and then they want to just decide that pretend like it's not a bottleneck. You
Yeah,
know, but then that's just like putting a blindfold on doesn't help. Yeah.
100%. 100%. And this is literally the right phrase I was looking for, right? At that time, the main concern is okay, money, right?
Yeah.
Living in a $300 shared bedroom and working $8 an hour, and you work 60 hours a week sometime, and it's not, you know, you cannot do much with it, right?
And
So
people that say money doesn't matter, almost every minute of the day is dictated by money for those same people. Yeah. Everything's, you know, when their vacation, when they get up in the morning, where they go, what they do, right? Like it. So yeah.
exactly, yeah. So that's like, you know, what alchemy really like kind of contributed as much is like, okay, every time instead of talking to people that would think that I'm not part of like the circle on my lunch break, I just go with my short videos of alchemy and just watch them, right? I
That's
have them,
good.
like I have the files and in my phone and I just listen to them, right? And in this case, you don't communicate as much with people, so your mind is focused on one direction. So it really
Yeah, it's
do.
hard to have a breakthrough without being alone a fair amount of the time. Like if you might be lucky enough to have people around you that are really working in the same direction, like I have with Mike, or like we
Yeah,
have, you know, in ways with OMG. But realistically, even then, there's breakthroughs that you personally might be working on that even someone close to you is just working on something different. That comes up with Mike and myself plenty, right? We're kind of on a fairly small scale, right? Or I might be working on breaking through with certain law of implication ideas. He's working um, on something that's super important for me as well, and that allows me to do that, right, with business. And then
yeah,
we let ourselves each kind of focus on that. So yeah, just realistically, there's a certain amount of time that has to be alone sometimes. It's not like I tell people to be alone, but
yeah.
yeah, what's good is to realize it's not necessarily bad either. You know, there's just a certain necessity to it sometimes.
Yeah, it's 100%. Even until today, some people's like, "Oh, what are you doing? You want to go?" I like, "Oh, let's hang out. Let's do something." And it's like, "No, I'm in the house. You know, you want to come to the house? Come." And I know it's a limited amount of time. You cannot be here for over 3 hours. You're gonna leave, right? And my time is controlled, so I can put my time in things that matters to me the most, right? As
Mhm.
compared if you leave the house, you're like floating. You don't know. Oh, let's have lunch here, and they change the mind. Oh, let's change. Like let's have lunch here, and there's somebody else that is supposed to come, and you see, okay, oh, that person cannot respect time, and I'm here wasting my time, you know.
Mhm.
And what happened, like you leave your like your zone, right? Your zone, it's not like your comfort zone, but like your, yeah, like your control center. right?
Mhm.
Once you're out there, you're not productive. You're just like, okay, doing things that it's sometimes good to have good experience, go experience something. But if it's not something that you're interested in having an experience in, you're just all over the place with a different type of people that you don't control. Like you don't know who are these people. So the conversation, sometimes you're gonna struggle to have an associative conversation with people because they're thinking about different things and you're thinking about different things at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Like when Joseph and Frankie came to the house, we spoke until like we spent like 8 hours here, right? And they left around 1 a.m., right? Why? Because everybody's focused toward the same direction and it's just like it just flows naturally, right? Like me and Mike, if we get together, it's like, oh, we can spend like all day together pretty much. Because like,
Oh, that's nice.
like just like learning breakthroughs like all day long, right? But like back then, you are in a circle that you like, okay, no one here speak my language. And you either have to think associatively like with those people or like try on your own way to like like you do comparative thinking, trying to like okay find the right way for you to go through your day, right? And alchemy was a big portion of how I keep my focus on like mindset standpoint, right? And when you really dive deep into it, like when it, that's like first portion is thinking for yourself, and then you dive deep into like, problem solving, how to break walls, how to build a relationship with, you and your client, and how to build a relationship with you and your agency, right? Okay, you're the only person crazy enough to be your first client. Go create your website, you know, rank it, and use your teaching and like use the learning, everything that you're learning, implement it on yourself, right? And you get to a point where you can go outside and it's like, hey, this is me, right? I told Mike about this. I'll go to at that time, working in a sneaker store, kind of know other sneaker store owners. I went to one of them. It was like, oh, now I'm not in the sneaker store anymore, and I'm working on starting my own agency. And it's things started to pick up, and they're like, oh, why you're not in that sneaker store anymore? It's like, oh, by the way, I'm here to sell you some stuff. I'm here to sell you map listings. Your map listing, you realize your number is not the same number in front of your store. So what's going on, right? And it's like, oh, you're not at that sneaker store. It's like, no, I'm starting my own agency. And he's like, oh, agency. He's like, have a little bit of understanding of marketing, but he's like, oh, agency is like what? I was like, marketing agency is like, it's like he couldn't see somebody like me like being in marketing, right? That's like how the perception, the power of perception, right? I was like, oh, I was like, yeah, I have a marketing agency. He's like, oh, you have a website? I was like, yeah. And he went to the website. He's like, no, this is you. I was like, he went to the website, and he's like, took his phone, just put his phone under the table and dialed that 1-800 number, and a ring on my phone. I had a call forwarding.
Oh, that's
And
great.
yeah, and I picked up. I was like, "Hey, this is Mohamadi from Urban Assistant. What can I do for you?" And he hanged up, right? And he's like, "Wow, I just called you." I was like, "Yeah, I'm working on it." So that was the client, right? But you can only do this if you have like the knowledge in the first place, and then the strategy behind it, right? The strategy behind it, how to position yourself as an expert, right? Like out there, even if you're starting, right? So like thinking for yourself, like how to build a relationship for it, like within yourself and your company, your agency, the approach you should take as like dealing with problems, how to dissect problem, breaking down walls, layer by layer. It was like not only a thing for yourself, but like the extra resources that comes along with it, right? So it was really a good companion of my alchemy series, and
Okay.
It was definitely a game changer because like throughout the journey, you know, I haven't said this anywhere, but like I joined when I joined, paid for the training, everything, and now I believe that hey, I'm gonna quit that sneaker store job, and I was just like, hey, I'm gonna make this happen, right? And it did not happen right away. It took like three months, good 3 months, and I got to a point where I was walking around New York City with 71 cents on my name, right? And people would see me it's like looking happy, like just knowing that I'm working on something, right? Money is not an issue. Just if you have a product that's going to change people's lives, help people's businesses, you should not be scared of anything. Just listen and get the right approach to take it to people. And that's what I did, right? You have to go through the process. And I went through it and things start happening, right? So it's like a complete like step by step process pretty much, right? On like getting, oh, you are in OMG, you have all the training in the world from the best people in the world. Just go outside and remember to just take this strategy back with you and go, right? You take it, I took it, went out, and that's it.
Excellent. Great story and great, yeah, it really provided a lot of examples and real life application of things. Thank you so much, Mohamadi, for sharing all that and coming on and being willing to be real and so forth. Thank you. Awesome. Joseph, between what Mohamadi said and or of course what yourself, let me just kind of turn it over to you. You might have some notes on that, and then of course, anyway, however you want to start, either go for it.
Okay. Definitely taking a lot of notes. I mean, I took notes when I was hanging out with Mohamadi the other day. We spent 7 hours. I was taking notes. I always have my notebook with me. Recommendation of David Mills, of course.
Nice.
But you know, Mohamadi's talking about his experience. I see.
Oh, that's great. Mohamadi held up his notebook there too.
Yeah.
You know what, Joseph, sorry for cutting you off, but this is so good. Was on a webinar recently, and you know, Mike just pulled up his notebook, and all of a sudden, everybody on the webinar have the notebook on their hand. And I was like, you know, everybody goes in the same direction, like head first, you know, just charging. You know, and that moment was so special. Jason Calori has his notebook.
Oh, that's great.
I had my notebook, and literally everybody had the notebook, and it was so cool.
Yeah, where's mine? I'd have to get it, but it's right over there. So excellent, love it.
So I just wanted to address Omar. He said that it's difficult to find like-minded people. So I'm sure we all go through that. We've all had that experience as we go through LOI, but we also have to remember that at one point we didn't have this framework either. So it's kind of our job to try and at least get the people closest to us that are somewhat similar, that are our allies. At least they may not have the most evil, you know, ideas. But part of my journey has been asking myself that question: am I an evil jerk? Would I have been a Nazi if I was born in Nazi Germany? You know, that Milgram experiment, that was one of the things that was a major breakthrough in my LOI career, was opening that question and really looking at it and really asking that question. That took a lot of time to really get there.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, that seems to have been a turning point for a number of people, like kind of like an organizing principle, being willing to ask that question. And it's not about answering it yes or no. Yeah, I am an evil jerk. I would be, you know, this, but kind of realizing that something about the way that all people think, if we're in the wrong environment, we would probably, like, it's not even about percentages, like in terms of probability. It's just, it's pretty obvious from history, unless there's a specific reason why we would be different. That's not just like, oh, well, I wouldn't do that, you know, but it has to be some kind of underlying method or approach. Yeah, so excellent.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you were willing to ask that question too. That's so cool.
Well, it's because of you, of course. And then also I had the recommendation from Jason Calori, a lot of different people saying that they went through a similar experience. And sometimes, you know, especially for a beginner in LOI, you might see David as a guru, and having other people say the same thing just helps her integrate it and really feel it and say, okay, this guy must be on something, you know. But since this is for new people, I'd like to help and say something for those new people that might feel lost, or like this is just one giant blob of things that they can't understand, because that was it for me when I started too. I had no idea. The first time that I ever interacted, besides the OMG Success Framework video, which was, if I didn't have that video, there's no way I would have had success with OMG. I just would have been so frustrated. I was frustrated. I was confused. I was overwhelmed. But that video gave me a calm confidence and realized that, okay, this is the way that it is. This is the way that it has to be when you have the framework for how the brain works, your consciousness screen, and all that framework that you've given us, understanding how the world works, essentially, right? So there's so many different things that we could say, right, on this webinar. We have to understand importance. And then we understand that importance is impact on our consciousness screen, right? So then it just takes a lot of different layers to finally understanding the practical and, let's say, the surface level things that we talk about. But without the framework that's only just going to get built through time and just listening, you're not going to get to where we might get, where we think, I mean, it seems like we know a lot more, but really it's just we have a framework. That's all it is. It's not that we're smarter. It's not that we're special. We just built a framework. So my recommendation to anyone that's starting is just stick with it, keep listening, and over time that framework will build and things will just start to make sense. And it's crazy when you start to really understand how the world works, and you live in a different dimension than other people.
It's very powerful.
And that all the results that I've gotten in my life are a result of this method. I know 50%, let's say, luck, and the other 50% is having a method of how to make progress, how to understand what questions to ask. I mean, that's what it really comes down to is questions, and understanding not how to answer questions, but which questions to ask in the first place, right? So
and just like that, if you ask a question, the asking of a question itself is powerful. Like it gets you somewhere, you know, like it isn't that you haven't accomplished anything until you've answered it, you know. But instead, if you found a good question, then you've made progress.
100%. It's like the people, sorry for intervening here. It's like a lot of people from my community, they just don't ask themselves the question of where would I be if I stick to this in the next 10 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not have a question. You're not going to question yourself if you don't have a framework, pretty much.
And you know how you talked about, yeah, like or just what you said, where you carry something forward 10 years. That's comparative thinking, right? Because you're thinking kind of mathematically, like you're adding, okay, well, what will happen over time? You know, like in you're constructing, right? You're building. Associatively, what our mind does is extrapolate that pretty much that what's happening now is going to keep happening, or if there's a trend, people this comes out in many different ways. If someone doesn't accomplish anything for a couple of days, their mind will immediately extrapolate just that and feel like they'll feel overwhelmed because their mind will feel like they're going to keep not accomplishing very much, you know. So whatever is like kind of happening in a quick little short-term trend, the mind will extrapolate. This is as an example of associative thinking or an aspect of it. If things are staying the same, if day after day they're getting their $300, like their money from their renters or the people they're sharing an apartment with, they're making money with Uber for even a month or two, they'll be like, okay, I make this amount of money. It seems consistent. So the mind will extrapolate that. It'll just feel like that'll happen forever, right? Same thing if something goes downhill, it'll feel like it'll go downhill forever, even if it's just been a few days. That can happen in a relationship. There's not, like some issue happens in a relationship for a couple days, or something doesn't happen for a few days, or it does, then very quickly someone will think like, oh, my partner's always doing this, right, or whatever. So this extrapolation, whether it's things happening consistently for a few days or a month, whether something bad or good happens, the mind just extrapolates so quickly, and it feels so real that trend or that consistency, that flat line of the money just constantly coming in, but you worked it forward comparatively, and you're like, well, but if you have these kids, then there's not going to be room for these people. It seems like common sense once you do it, but it's such a breakthrough in life to get to the point where you really feel the idea that when you think something through, same thing with the fear video, when you think something through how it's going to actually play out, that common sense or obvious truth that comes from that was previously not obvious to our mind. Our mind, through associative thinking, no matter how simple it was when we do the math, our mind was not doing that and would not have done that. And that in and of itself is so different for people, because even after someone does the math, normally they'll think, oh, well, that was obvious. Like they'll even say, like, I already knew that, right? But they didn't, and their mind didn't know it or associate it or feel it, or it wouldn't give them feelings based on it, right? The people you were explaining, or even the fictitious or archetypical person that is driving Uber, making $300, sharing the rent. That's what they felt, would keep happening, even though it's like super simple math to realize it wouldn't happen. But if they did it, if you walked them through it, they would say, oh, well, yeah, not always, but it's very common. They might say, oh, well, that's obvious, or that's common sense, but they won't feel it, and so it doesn't matter. Anyway.
Yeah, it's wow. The way you put it, it's like a very deep understanding, right? You get to like really analyze. Oh, it happened. I would say, oh, it was obvious if I decide to think through it. Not knowing that because I was blessed with the opportunity of being able to future pace, I have had a breakthrough, right? And categorizing that as a breakthrough is very important in the sense that you can always follow the process to dissect any problem that you are, like any situation that you are in, pretty much.
Yeah. Constantly,
yeah. Yeah. Wow, it's amazing.
So yeah, like my interpretation is not an interpretation, but what's helped me is understanding. You're basically talking about the different consciousness and then our default, the way that our brain works. So it's like, it's not that we're bad, it's the way that things have to work. Because of the way that, in order for us to have goodness, obviously, we have to have the consciousness, right? But then you also have to have a brain that works by default, that survives. And that brain by default is going to get you, it's going to help you survive. It's going to do a lot of great things, but it's predictably going to go wrong. And understanding where it predictably goes wrong, that's been hugely helpful for me. And that was in the 2013, the Money Getting series. I went through that, I don't even know how many times, just over and over and over, until it became part of my, not my default, but it became part of at least my framework, where I can,
you feel it, it's integrated, it's part of you kind of feel it. Yeah.
Yeah, where I'm able to spot these red flags and I see, okay, that's just my brain getting stuck. That's the way it has to be, but I'm a conscious being and I have to interact consciously in order to unstick my brain so we can go where I want to go and where we all want to go, which is experiencing ultimate happiness.
Associative thinking versus comparative thinking has really kind of come out as a kind of the main theme of this webinar, I think, and it's huge. It's like really the organizing principle of Law of Implication. and it relates anyway to mastery, which I can talk about more in the future. But what did I want to say here? Comparative. Oh, another way to think of associative and comparative thinking that I just thought of as you're talking, Joseph, is it's necessary associative thinking just the same way that raw material is. And just the same, even if you think of getting food from the land, some things, the way they grow, you can just eat them right off the land, right? Like certain nuts or berries or whatever. Other raw material you either have to or want to process, and it might not even just be food. It might be shelter, right? You probably make a better shelter by mixing certain materials to make concrete, or even like something simpler, like something simple, but it's better than just collecting leaves. I'm sure if you mix certain muds and leaves, you can have something a lot stronger than just what you collect in the raw material, right? So it's like it doesn't mean the raw material is not very valuable. It's totally necessary. Same way associative thinking, our mind's default thinking, it's utterly necessary, just like the raw materials in nature are utterly necessary, or we couldn't make anything by processing it. But by processing the raw materials in nature, we can literally make computers, microchips, and just better buildings, which are very helpful to live in versus a crappy one, and and so forth. So that's the relationship, like again, constructive thinking versus associative. But shockingly enough, whereas people have figured out physically how to process materials, either food or other building materials, or for mechanical things, when it comes to thinking, then thinking comparatively, which is again just like processing anything, rather than just picking it off the ground and using it as is, people just don't realize to do it when they stumble into it, which is plenty, again, like with math, like you talked about, and that I've used it as you talked about, as me using it as an example. It works so well with mathematics to think comparatively, constructively, build, not just like feel what a number should be or what a sum should be, right, at a cash register. I first thought of that example when I was having a conversation with Mike, fairly early on when I knew him, and he brought up the idea, which is kind of common, but then I sort of debunked to him, and he saw it. He saw that like it made sense when I debunked it. But the idea that that you can know certain things, including even God's existence, he felt like the sort of common ideas that leads to like dogmatism or literal oppression of people who don't follow those ideas or don't agree. But that's when I thought of the example with mathematics, where it's really the opposite of oppression. There would be all kinds of fights and difficulty at a cash register if we had no way to just think clearly. Like we think very dogmatically about math, but it actually leads to not having fights, because the violence when it related to dogmatism and history and so forth is in place of knowing. It's when there's no math, there's just the sun revolves around the earth, right? Or these people are witches, right? Or whatever. That's not mathematical at all. Sorry, I meandered maybe a little bit there. But anyway, just the idea of the raw material and processing, that's like the relationship between associative thinking and then also doing the processing consciously. And then even when people stumble into where they think constructively or comparatively, they don't really realize what they're doing very well. So they kind of do what I call drive out of San Francisco, right? Where they do it here and there, right? The same people that are that you use the example from the West African community. And again, I'm just playing off of your example. I'm not in any way saying that myself. But they'll think constructively and comparatively in various areas, including with math, right? But then they won't translate it to breaking out of places where their own culture will be holding them back. And every culture, of course, has ways that hold them back. I think loneliness, right, and kind of the I don't know what kind of culture, but whatever label you want to put in the kind of culture that I'm more raised in, right? Or Mother Teresa said this, like the big problem in the West is like loneliness, right? There's benefits to Western or whatever culture, WASP culture and so forth, but then there's the kind of less focus on family. In America, people travel, they go to college, then that happened to me, right? You go to college, and then college is like the end all be all when I was growing up in the 80s, but then you go to a whole different state, and then you kind of lose track of everyone that you would have known from your community, and there's a real cut off, and then other people are cut off. I don't know, it's just just, I'm not saying I'm lonely, but it kind of the culture has a general predictable problem of being cut off from your family, and a certain type of loneliness, that comes from that, where people might even have a bunch of friends, but there's a certain fundamental loneliness.
Yeah, I think a lot of the cult, like there's a lot of thinking that goes into the specific culture, right? I think a lot of those thoughts are built around scarcity, like
Oh
or
yeah.
something, right? Like, oh, like a kid in Africa say a kid shouldn't eat eggs, like boiled eggs, right? So because
Mhm.
if it eats boiled eggs, there is like chickens everywhere, and the chicken lays the eggs, around. The kid can just go pick up those eggs and go cook it, right? So they're like, oh, a kid should not eat boiled eggs, right? And it's like a well-known phenomenon. When we was like little, I think that, oh, if you eat boiled eggs, you're gonna die or something.
Go blind.
And yeah, and it's like some of those things just lose track of the, like, as you grow up, like, oh, obviously if I've known that it tastes this good, I was gonna boil all the eggs in the house, right? All the eggs in the village, right? So you grow up and you start like, realizing it for yourself, but not all the thought, not all the concepts, like the theories are like so obvious when you grow up. Some of them have like, a lot of darkness in it, right? You don't really know the reason, right? And what happened is once we lose the sources, we all kind of like involved in a culture with a lot of thought that you really don't know the source, and you just act accordingly. So
Right.
if you start acting differently, they're like, oh, you're not acting right, and you're automatically acting wrong now, right? And who said the wrong and the right? Because you're being involved with something for so long doesn't mean it's right, right? And
Mhm.
what happened? You do something else, and now you see other people's like, oh, now it's, what you're doing is, it's nice. I want to join you, right? And you start seeing people fleeing from the other, like, concept, like the other, like the normal thinking per se, to like
Mhm.
abnormal thinking process. Like when I joined OMG back in 2016, I was like, hey, I'm gonna create my marketing agency. I'm gonna do like help businesses make more money and make money for myself. It's like, oh, do you get a certificate when you go through the training? I was like, no. It's like, oh, I'm going to school. My friend back then, he's like, oh, I'm going to school. I'm just gonna get graduated, have my certificates. You can work anywhere when you have your degrees and stuff. I was like, oh, okay, good for you. And then, 3 weeks ago, I got him to join Rainmaker, right? Because he's like, oh, it's like we've been so apart. He's like, oh, I always see you on Instagram. I saw your growth. You started from with this marketing thing, and now you get a penthouse. Now he came to my like in New Jersey to my penthouse there, and he's like, wow, I didn't even know something like that exists. Right? It's like, oh, you're going to school to teach you some stuff that it's constructive, teach you to think a certain way, and I expect that's the result that you're looking for, because if that's not what you're looking for, why would you spend an extra day there, right? So he came in and saw this, is like, oh, what are you doing? I want to get involved, I was like, hey, okay, you want to get involved? Here's where I started. And you're lucky I started with $8,000. Now you don't have to start with $8,000, right? And he gets in. It's like, oh, every minute is like, hey, can you help me with this? Help me with that. Of course, I can help you, but just understand that if you rely on somebody to always come and unlock a door for you, you're never gonna learn to unlock a door, right? And I
Yeah.
let him at that, right? It's like when I started, I didn't call somebody every time, like I feel like I'm locked out.
Mhm.
So you have to learn how to unlock something, right? I had that conversation with him 3 days ago. Until today, I haven't heard from him, right? So it means he started to learn how to unlock his own doors.
Good. Yeah, it's kind of an idea with this hero series is to, yeah, like people are doing it regardless. Absolutely. It's really amazing to me the progress and how well it's worked with people taking off on their own with law of implication and so forth. But yeah, like I want people to not. There's no big problem with people asking me questions at all. That's great. But just I don't want anyone to be held back by the feeling of, oh, I have to ask David this, or that there's something special about me. Like it's great to think I'm talented and and to benefit from whatever I've trailblazed, but never to be kind of held back by anything to do with me or whatever.
Like it's the concept, right? When you're like, oh, okay, not only David, someone that, top of the world in Magic of the Gathering, one of like, if not the most strategy requires type of game, nothing like chess, because chess has a lot to do with memory as well. But like pure strategy, right? And not only he has a great relationship with money, right? The money aspect is taken care of, the relationship aspect is taken care of, and a lot of like different levels of life, right? Different levels of life. It's secure. Who would you rather model, right? Oh, you're gonna see people that's like, oh, I'm making all this money, and yet they're breaking up with they're filing divorces, right? So one side is good, and the other side
And
is
they're also still working and marketing themselves. so you wonder.
Exactly, right. So it's like not balance in a way, but oh, you have one problem taken care of, and you haven't figured out, and the other problems like really going badly for you, right? How can you be good, like extremely good in one thing, and the other thing you're like extremely bad, right? If you have something that is potentially replicable, you shouldn't have like a worst case in like a bad performance, a worst performance under your belt in specific categories, right? Oh, if you want to listen to me about entrepreneurship. But if you want to, but don't listen to me about relationship and how to treat people, right? It just doesn't make sense. You cannot like, if you have to listen to somebody because of one thing and you realize that, oh, on the other thing you cannot listen to them, it's like, what's the point of listening to that person at the first place?
Well, I have a funny kind of thought about that. Yeah, with most anyone, you're going to find they're lacking like the fundamental meta strategy, right? That you're going to get from me right there. But the funny thing is, if they're really having a lot of success in one area, and you know that they're lacking the most foundational meta strategy, then there's something that they're doing really right in where they're succeeding, because they're fundamentally kind of have the wrong base, right, or frame in certain areas, or it's flawed in various. So what I do look for, I certainly don't model like their philosophy, right, overall, or I know that there's going to be flaws and errors, but there's somewhere where they discovered something like really smart and like really clever too. So it's kind of funny. Like I'll say this to Mike Long. I'll be like, there's something that this guy is doing that's really clever that we haven't figured out. Because if I was as dumb as him in all these other areas, then I wouldn't nearly have the success that he's having. So there's something he's doing that's really clever that I don't know, that we need to figure out, right? Because, or like some people are just, for example, just jerks, like overall, right? Or their product is just really crappy. But if they're doing kind of well in a certain simple way of making a lot of sales, I'm like, well, there's something they figured out. And sometimes it might just be like they're just getting a short-term benefit by basically just lying about what they have, and so that's nothing special. But in a kind of humorous but sort of true way, there's often like something to figure out where there's something that they've got. Cause I'm like, man, I couldn't possibly succeed if I screwed up like them in this other area, but they're doing it. So what are they doing? So anyway.
It's like, I'm like understanding pretty much, picking and choosing, right? Oh, you like this person because it's like, okay, rah, 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 it's motivating, blah, blah, like, and you just follow along, you get motivated. Maybe you like get a couple of business success through like whatever you have learned from him or modeling. And then you realize that a lot of the behavior it doesn't matter who you hang out around, like who you listen to the most and who you hang out the most with, they stop rubbing into you, right? You start like getting a lot of the criterias. And one of the criteria that you might get from somebody that is rah-rah is like, treating people badly, for instance. Or it's like me and on top of the world, right? And like, this is how we do it here type of situation, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of embody like the bulk data, right? And you realize that the only thing that attracted you, it's great, right? He figured out something right. He figured out something right, but it comes along with all different type of assets, and it's like very tricky and very dangerous to just.
Yeah, no, you're very right about that. And there's a certain mindset that of, like you say, like with the rah-rah, or the certain that they call positive, that someone like me, where I'm looking for bottlenecks or seeing what could go wrong, I try to see what could go. I don't ask myself what's the worst that could happen, almost never, because it's almost never a useful question, weirdly enough. But what I do look for is like, what reasonably, like on this path, what's a flaw, what's a bottleneck, what could go wrong, that's kind of like likely, right? Or on this path. And I'll spot something and I'll do it in order to get it right. But a certain type of positive mindset person feels like that's negative, or like, why are you pointing out this? We're just supposed to, like, the idea that it's positive to just say plan A is going to work, plan A is going to work, and say, well, if we do plan A, then what about this? And that's negative. Then that's a particular common problem. I think. Joseph,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was saying 100%.
Yeah. I want to make sure that anything that you kind of intended to say, you weren't cut off. I don't know if we interrupted anything that you had particularly prepared to say.
No, it's okay. We can just keep going so we can stay in flow.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm good. I'm not. There's nothing else I'm about to say myself. But I also just wanted to particularly make sure that that anything that you had ready to say.
Also,
because I want to. Not like for your feelings, but I want to know. I want to know what you have.
You must. I mean, everywhere I go, I've listened to LOI for years. I've spent over 10,000 hours for sure listening to LOI. But then there's a trick, is where you'll think that because you listened to it, you made progress, but you have to try and apply it through your own life and see, like, we all have, like, we'll think of similar things, and it's always something to do with relationship or money, and you'll see something there where you're trying to figure it out. I just lost my train of thought there, but
I think I kind of got where you're coming from, right? Like the situation that I mentioned, that okay, I future pasted and I saw that okay, it's not an ideal place I would want to be in, right? And at that time, you'd be like, oh, you have two choices, right? And that's the tricky part. You can be like, oh, it's obvious, right? And you don't realize that you just had a breakthrough because you decided to apply thought to it, and you decided to ask yourself question, right? They'll be teaching of finding the right questions first, right? Nobody have all the answers, but nobody have all the questions either, right? So you have to consistently look, not to find answers, but also look to find questions, right? And
No, please. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, and when you follow the training and everything, and apply it to any situation that you are facing, you kind of get to see like, okay, there's a formula, right? Finding a bottleneck, solving the bottleneck. Jason was showing me the 4 perspective analogy with the maze, right? And he told me that he had used this numerous amount of time solving a lot of problems, right? And the awareness of like, okay, you listen to Law of Implication, right? You have a lot of insight, a lot of data. Now It's like you have the tools to build a framework. And so in any situation you are going through, use the tools, bring the tools. It's a maze, whatever it is. And much like you have the ability to carve out questions, you take your notebook and you start writing the questions, right? That relates to the problem. And that's the process. We find out the great questions, and we turn around and see things that are obvious, that seems obvious, but with our understanding, we know it's not obvious because we did the work that have allowed us to see what was obvious. So when you
It's
mentioned,
like if you're in a sports stadium and you turn to your friend and say, look at all the people, I wonder why so many people are wearing red shirts, right?
Mm.
At that moment, you look around and the people wearing red shirts are obvious. Previous to asking that question or bringing that up, the red shirts might not have been obvious, if that makes sense. So again, you ask a question and then all of a sudden a new thing kind of becomes obvious. The fact that something becomes obvious after a question doesn't mean it was obvious prior to the question, anyway. So just
so yes, 100%, right? So when Joseph said, you have to do like apply it to your life, it's just like I was able to get the fact that, okay, think for yourself. That's a tool, right? Think for yourself, one tool, right? And now, how am I going to think for myself? I have to ask myself certain questions to be able to reflect on it and find answers, right? So I have the tool that Law of Implication provided, and then I can go use it to create any type of, anything I want to create, any building that I want to build, right? So having going through LOI is one thing, and also implementing it, you have to be able to lie parallel, against everything that you are facing, right? To be able to, really benefit from the incredible growth that we have or was all blessed to, to witness.
Yeah, it's like if you realize that you can process raw materials for the first time. Previously, if you and your primitive group of people were just taking what was there and never thinking that you could mix them together or do stuff with it, then it becomes this. It sort of explains LOI in a certain way, or kind of as a mental image of it or mental picture, is like that the idea. So there's two ways to treat that. One is to be like, oh my gosh, the big breakthrough is we can mix mud and leaves, let it sit, and all of a sudden that creates a very hard substance for our roof, right? And then as if the breakthrough is just that you can make a better roof. Or the breakthrough can be, oh my goodness, we can process raw materials, and who knows what we can do with that meta concept that we can process raw materials.
Yeah.
What hit me at some point 20 plus years ago was, oh my goodness, we can think about ideas in a way and come up with things that we actually know, and somehow that can just make such a difference. And then I was like a kid in a candy store with what else can I build, what else can I process, right? Like what can we make now that I realize I don't have to just pick what's there. And again, we can look around and see that isn't at all obvious. Like when we look at how people act and think about things that they themselves treat as important, right? Again, sometimes people do think comparatively, properly, but they don't realize they're doing it, and so they can't really do it intentionally and pervasively. And so they'll, much like a primitive community who makes a few things but doesn't realize that they can make things, they just stumble across a few things they can make but aren't actively trying to see what else can I make, what else can I process, and come up with all new things. Or if you can make steel or bronze or whatever it is by mixing metals, and then realize, wow, I can mix metals. There's an idea of metallurgy, and what else can we make? But yeah, it occurred to me I could make or prove these ideas, and somehow by knowing them. Oh, and I was saying that clearly when we look around, people don't do it much. They're constantly constrained by themes, conceptual boxes, anomalies. Realizing that an anomaly just means so much, but that by default we'll just, oh, that's nothing, that's not a big deal, or we explain it away. But anyway, that's
Yeah, it's incredible, and it again you see the pattern through like everything that you're doing, right? We see the pattern. I look at Rainmaker. It's like, holy smokes! Somebody can go through Rainmaker, and they get all this all in one, like powerful, like like arsenal, right? Like tools. And it's like, oh, we can build a house with this tool, and also we can dig a hole, right? Oh, we can cut trees with it as well, right? You have a tool that have multi-purpose. Decide to, oh, I'm gonna build my agency around it. I'm gonna build an agency, or I'm gonna go build an affiliate website. Oh, I'm gonna go and get into e-commerce, right? See, like the concept, like the most important thing is like the tool, right? And once you get the tool, once you're in a position to be able to understand the tool, everything else is, you can literally apply to everything else that you want to do.
You know what the magic is that I kind of built, like our business that people have learned from, like you talk about with Rainmaker OMG, was based on search engine optimization. What really was so beautiful to me uh, almost 20 years ago when I first the minute I heard the concept, but what it was, the magic was you could build something before anyone else gave you permission, even with sales, even if like previously you could do a business without anyone's permission. You didn't need a degree, you didn't need someone to hire you, but you needed people to buy what you were selling at least, which is still very difficult because previously I had done, before the computers, and that's not before computers, but before the internet was big and so forth, there was network marketing, there was franchises, I guess. Franchise needed a bunch of money to start with. Network marketing was a way that people could just start with nothing, like Amway and Free Life and so forth, Herbalife and such. But you still needed people to say yes to you, and it's like, fake it till you make it, that kind of thing. But with SEO, you actually don't need to even fake it till you make it. You can actually make it for real. Just like I thought of that phrase when you made that website for yourself and you showed the other shoe store owner. You didn't have to fake it till you make it. You don't have to be like, yeah, it's going great, my agency's doing so well, I can make you lots of money, I'll help you advertise. You actually build something and no one needed to say yes or give you permission. You could actually just build it. And that didn't really exist, and maybe it existed somehow, some way, but it mostly didn't exist before SEO. And maybe it did. Maybe you could build some machine, I don't know, some kind of radio, or maybe you could fix, maybe even learning how to fix appliances or HVAC. Like maybe that was a kind of a cool thing where you could like learn to do that without anyone saying yes or giving you permission, and then at least you could have things that you fixed, and that would be kind of, that's kind of cool, right? That at least there's something. But I just love this kind of stepping stone idea. You can build something without permission, that's real, that's valuable, and that really appealed to me. I was like, wow, I could just like sit there in my house.
Yeah, and the powerful thing is that it's built on something that all the people that are thinking associatively just approve of, right? When you say
Totally.
it's Google, right?
Well, that's perceived value. Like appreciating associative thinking for what it is, it gives you such insight into people, and you need something that someone's going to quickly associate. That's valuable. Yeah, I want that, right? You don't want something where you have to get them to walk through a whole series of logical steps to bridge to where they want or they see something. You want to find things in life when you're making money. You don't want to be relying on constructive thinking. You want someone to be like, bam, I want that, and then you put it in front of their face, right? So it's like the opposite. Like you can see that when you see how it all works. You're like, no, I want to put something, and they'd be like, yep. That's what I want. One feeling, one step.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Like you get to master the other side, right? And while knowingly knowing that that's not the only side of the coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is a whole different side that give you the ability to to have a better perception, better view of this side of the coin.
Yeah.
And just like a complete game changer. And that kind of gives me like a lot of like confidence in a lot of the things that I would do. I'd be like, oh, we're gonna take down Uber Eats and Grubhub. You just feel like we can get it done, right? And not even think about it twice, you know. And you go through things like that, knowing that okay, I know what people see as valuable, right? Because they have already built the conceptual value of it, and people can quickly connect with it. Or you allowing people to be able to leverage it and sell this stuff online and have it delivered with no issue. That's pretty much what these people are doing. Where you're doing it in another way, like that, because you have access to like the other side of the coin, which is building those meta tools that allow you to eliminate everything else that you're facing.
Yep. Yeah, that relates to the mastery idea too. If you know you can master something, if you're willing to put the commitment in to do it. Any other thoughts? And you might have been kind of completed, but any other thoughts about the idea of implementing law of implication and as part of the mastery process of it, Joseph?
Mohamadi, look like you had something to say, so just go ahead and say it.
Oh, absolutely.
I said like LOI, right? It's the ability to understand the level of importance that different things, like that different thing that you need different thing. The understanding the level of importance of different portion of your life, right? Your life is not only just making sure your relationship with money is good. You have to better your relationship also with the people you do business with your family, and overall like helping people, right? And once you're you understand LOI fully, it's not like, oh, we're just trying to make money, right? It implies different section of it, and the full mastery would give you like would allow you full mastery of LOI would allow you to have a life that could be considered a fulfilling life in a sense, right? Because you see, like majority people that are that are able to take care of the financial aspect, they're struggling with like maybe drugs, they're struggling with maybe relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and they just find their like a getaway, like an excuse for them is like always go for more money, right? And that doesn't solve any other problems. Like somebody that is overdosed, the more overdose you get, the less you care about anything else, right? So they just overdose in the things that make them feel a sense of fulfillment, which is okay, the monetary aspect. While everything else is a chaos, but they cannot see because they're not sober.
Yeah, it's like a spiral where they're kind of only good at the one thing that they have a box for that's effective. And then they decide that that's the thing that matters. And it totally ignores bottleneck thinking, where money is a bottleneck until it isn't. The point of any bottleneck, or the point of noticing a bottleneck, not the point of the bottleneck, but the point of focusing on a bottleneck is to break it, not to perpetually have it. It's like with racism, the idea would be to get rid of it, like as long as the it is something bad, right? These days it's so ill-defined and random that, but the idea theoretically should be to get rid of it, and then you spot people that seem to want to perpetuate it, and then obviously that's the opposite. It kind of a lot like the money thing, though. It's their box is all about being important because of racism in some way, shape, or form, and then so they want that, but they want to make it all about that because that's what their box is geared towards, But instead, we want to break bottlenecks and move along to the next thing until there's no more things.
Exactly.
Right?
So it's LOI is all about like focusing on bottlenecks and just breaking through bottlenecks, right? Breaking the walls to get to a position like, okay, there's no more bottleneck, and you're constantly seeking for bottlenecks, right? And not
exactly. And not only does that help you break bottlenecks, but it helps you not get wrapped up, like you say, in something that previously was a bottleneck. where it normally is. Just like if you're trying to get women to sleep with you, and then you get married, you better get off that previous bottleneck.
It's
I mean, with multiple so forth. So good. I'll probably look to end this webinar fairly soon. So I just want to make sure everyone that there's nothing that anyone wanted to say that isn't said.
Well, yeah, I'll answer the question. So in terms of applying LOI for any beginner or anyone that doesn't feel like that they've mastered it, I took David's recommendation and I dropped all other goals besides making sure that I was feeding myself and any type of relationship had a boundary of at least spending some sort of time with, friends, family. But in terms of trying to get ahead with money or trying to get ahead with anything, I made this my absolute priority. And then through that, I kind of like every time I would look up, I would just start achieving results in other areas of my life, like money, relationships. And it was through that. It was through dropping everything else, making sure that they're maintained, right? We're consolidating our breakthroughs, but then we're going after one breakthrough at a time. And I made understanding this my full priority. And it's the key to ultimate happiness. I mean, and progress awesome. And making money. I mean, I feel you said $10 million. I mean, for sure, I feel I could build towards $10 million, no problem, because I have the foundation. I mean, I know at a basic level how everything works and understanding questions, impact, consciousness, comparisons, the 4 pillars of superhuman performance. So that's my recommendation.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's really awesome. Well, he's referring to the alchemy idea where I said my goal in alchemy would be that if you had a friend and the only way that they could somehow get alchemy, get access to alchemy was through $10 million, would you say that it was worth it? Of course, if they can get it for less, they should get it for less. But if it was the only way, and then and Joseph was affirming that it pretty much would be good there. There's one comment I wanted. That was awesome. Thank you, Joseph. Lauren said something kind of nice. David's genius feels so inclusive. One of the earliest things I did or said back in 2013, I think, was that I felt like people could functionally could function as if they were very, very smart and intelligent, regardless of whatever their intelligence was or wasn't or whatever. I don't think in terms of whether someone's smart specifically. There's all kinds of ways that people are kind of smart and stupid based on frameworks, conceptual boxes, whatever, talent. But I did say that, yeah, like you can function as if you're a genius or way next level for a whole number of reasons, even just keeping a notebook, asking good questions. Obviously, getting a sense of comparative thinking and so forth. What was the thing just on the tip of my mind just a second ago? With genius level thinking, I mean, realizing not that default thinking and the raw material of associative thinking is default. But what was it? There's something else. Genius. Really. And I haven't really even spent that much time in this ever, and I'm not now either. But getting a sense of what words refer to, like I really felt from the beginning that, like, we think with words and mental objects and words, and it's like if you're a baseball player or an outfielder and you have blurry vision, or any kind of baseball player and your vision's blurry. Or if people's vision in general was blurry and you were playing baseball and your vision was clear, or you had glasses that made it clear, then even if other people were like naturally better at baseball than you, were more athletic, you could basically outperform them on a whole different level just by having clear vision. And it's like that with intelligence, wisdom, whatever, like functional intelligence in terms of making good decisions, with various things that I know and can share with you guys, and do share, of course. But specifically words are like that, where the meaning of words, which are part of the basic unit of thought, are blurry for people. They don't, and they're inherently blurry where they can't make it not blurry. Just like if someone's vision is bad, they can't squint to make it better. They have to do something to change the game to make it better. And what I'm saying now doesn't really relate to anything except for Lawrence's comment. It doesn't really relate to anything we've talked about in this webinar, but just based on his comment. But the level of genius you can function at in terms of just making good practical decisions, I don't mean like being some kind of ivory tower genius or not, but just practical day-to-day, constant, smarts, being able to see clearly with words, which might be a good reason for me to give it another whack and talking about it soon. But yeah, I mean, your functional level of intelligence, just like the baseball mental picture, it doesn't really matter how athletic someone else is. If you just have that, it can make such a difference. And you guys, regardless of how much I focus on words and meanings, I've talked about it plenty with constructing definitions and just understanding what the world is made up of, and things. Just not even just words. There's words, but then there's the basic foundation for understanding what words refer to with consciousness screen, and so forth. So awesome. I love the way Joseph kind of ended up with things. I just wanted to address Lawrence's comment.
About that?
Yeah, please.
Last thing is that another thing that's extremely helpful is going through it as if you're going to explain it to somebody else, and also having somebody to talk to. That just, I mean, I can't imagine if I didn't have somebody to talk to try and work through and try and explain to them. So then that shows me where my bottleneck is, my lack of understanding, my lack of clarity with LOI. That's my final word.
Who do you, you don't have to name the person or not, but is it a friend? Is it a family member? Who do you talk to?
Well, I've talked to a few people about it for sure, but the number one person I talked to is a fellow OMGer that I joined with in 2016, who is one of my best friends, but rather would remain nameless, at least for now.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, no, as I said, it wasn't about naming them, but I was just curious the genre of person that you, like, where you found. So that's wonderful. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, Dave. That's a great way to wrap it up as well. Thank you, Mohamadi. Of course, if there's anything final you want to say.
That was a pleasure.
Wonderful.
Incredible. Thank you for letting us here, and it's super exciting.
Super. Awesome, guys, and thank you for your participation, everyone, on the webinar. Wonderful webinar, turned out great. I'll address some of the other things like further stuff with mastery in the future as I organize things for my definitive series. And great. Okay, I'll end the webinar here. Thanks, everyone, so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lawrence, for trailblazing the previous webinar. So we kind of have these kind of casual webinars, and Mike Rodwell also trailblazing with this kind of casual webinar.
And Megan too.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course. She had kind of, she trailblazed a different sort of webinar where she really had like a full presentation. So those kind of, both those styles are really great. Excellent. Love it. Okay, guys, I'll see you all soon.
Take care.